Bless her heart, she does her best, the pastor's wife Linda whispered to the circle of moms gathered in the fellowship hall, her eyes cutting toward me with practiced pity. Not everyone can afford to contribute to the youth mission trip. Some families just struggle, and we have to show grace. My 11-year-old son Elijah heard every word from the hallway where he'd gone to get punch. I saw his face crumple before he ducked around the corner. But why did that condescending whisper spark a decision I'd resisted for 5 years? And why did Sunday's church bulletin contain an announcement that would silence every pitying voice in the congregation? The anonymous donor who has funded our youth program since 2019 wishes to address the congregation following today's service. All members are encouraged to attend. Elijah tugged my sleeve as we settled into our pew. Mom, what anonymous donor? You'll see, sweetheart. Just wait. I'd been funding Grace Community Church's youth program for 5 years without anyone knowing. It started small, covering the gap when the summer camp scholarship fund came up short. Then expanding to sponsor mission trips that otherwise would have been canceled. Then quietly ensuring the youth pastor's salary was supplemented, so the church wouldn't have to choose between keeping him and maintaining the building. The donations totaled approximately $340,000 over 5 years. Nobody knew because I'd structured every gift through a charitable trust managed by my financial advisor. The church received funds from the Harrison Family Foundation, a name generic enough to avoid suspicion. Pastor Williams knew only that a benefactor cared deeply about youth ministry. He had no idea the benefactor sat in his congregation every Sunday, driving a 10-year-old Honda and wearing clothes from Target. I preferred it that way. My wealth was inherited, unexpected, and deliberately invisible. My grandfather, Thomas Harrison, had been a quiet man who worked as an engineer for an automotive company for 43 years. He lived modestly, drove used cars, clipped coupons. When he died, I was 24 and assumed he'd left behind a small pension and maybe a few thousand in savings. The estate was worth $14 million. Grandpa had invested his entire career's savings into automotive supplier stocks, held them through decades of growth, and never touched a penny. He'd lived on his pension alone, watching his investments compound while everyone assumed he was scraping by. His will was specific. The money went to me, his only grandchild who'd actually visited him regularly, who'd helped him with yard work and brought him casseroles, who'd seen him as a person rather than an obligation. My parents received nothing. They'd barely spoken to him in years. My cousins received token amounts. I received everything, along with a letter. Live simply. Give generously. Don't let money change who you are. I'd followed his advice for 17 years. The church never suspected because I didn't act wealthy. I worked as a middle school librarian, a job I loved that paid modestly. I lived in a comfortable but unremarkable house in a middle-class neighborhood. I drove practical vehicles, wore simple clothes, and never mentioned investments or trusts or charitable foundations. My son Elijah attended public school, played in the church youth group, and had no idea that the summer camps and mission trips he enjoyed were funded by his mother's anonymous donations. I wanted him to grow up without the distortions that visible wealth creates. I wanted him to understand that value comes from character, not bank accounts. I wanted him to earn things, appreciate things, learn that money is a tool rather than an identity. The church community saw a single mom doing her best. They saw someone who volunteered for cleanup duty after potlucks, who brought store-brand cookies to bake sales, who never contributed to the visible fundraising efforts that louder families trumpeted. They saw a charity case. Linda Morrison, the pastor's wife, had been the loudest voice in that perception. She led the women's ministry with the efficiency of a corporate executive and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. She organized fundraisers, coordinated volunteers, and maintained a mental ranking of every family's financial contribution to the church. At the top, families who donated visibly funded building campaigns and had their names on plaques. At the bottom, families who received assistance couldn't contribute to special projects and needed grace from their more fortunate brothers and sisters. I was firmly at the bottom in Linda's estimation. Such a sweet woman, she'd say about me, the words dripping with condescension. It must be so hard being a single mother with a librarian's salary. We should pray for her financial struggles, she'd suggest to prayer circles. Not everyone is blessed with abundance. I make sure the youth group scholarships include Elijah, she'd mentioned to other moms. His mother can't afford the fees, bless her heart. I'd tolerated it for years because confrontation served no purpose. My son was happy, the The youth program was thriving, and Linda's opinion of my finances was irrelevant to either. Then Elijah asked if we were poor. He found me in the kitchen after the fellowship hall incident. "Mom, the other kids were talking. They said their parents give money to the church, and we don't. They said Mrs. Morrison told them we're a charity family. What do you think?" "I don't know. We have a house and food and stuff. But we don't have a boat like Tyler's family, or go to Disney like Madison's family." He looked at me with 11-year-old confusion. "Are we poor? Is that why you never give money at church?" I pulled him close, my heart breaking at what he'd absorbed from careless adult whispers. "We're not poor, sweetheart. We're private. There's a difference." "What does that mean?" "It means some people show their money and some people don't. We're the kind who don't." "But why?" I looked at my son, this thoughtful boy who'd been made to feel less than by people who had no idea what I'd sacrificed to give them the youth program they took for granted. "Because I wanted you to grow up knowing that who you are matters more than what you have. But maybe I made a decision I'd been avoiding for years. Maybe it's time to show a few people the difference between appearance and reality." The meeting with Pastor Williams happened the following Tuesday. "Evelyn, you wanted to discuss the youth program?" "I want to discuss the anonymous donor." Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably. "I can't reveal the donor's identity." "I know. Because I'm the donor." Silence. "I'm sorry. The Harrison Family Foundation. It's my grandfather's trust. I've been funding the youth program since 2019. I slid documentation across his desk, trust paperwork, donation records, 5 years of financial support laid bare. "I'd like to address the congregation this Sunday." Pastor Williams stared at the papers, then at me, his understanding restructuring itself visibly. "You've given over $340,000 to this church. And Linda, my wife, has been calling you a charity case. Bless her heart." He winced. I don't know what to say. "Say you'll give me 5 minutes at the end of Sunday's service." "I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing it because my son asked if we were poor, and I realize my anonymity has allowed assumptions that hurt him." "Of course. Whatever you need." Sunday arrived with electric tension. The bulletin announcement had sparked speculation throughout the congregation. Who was the mysterious donor? How much had they given? Why reveal themselves now? Linda led pre-service, socializing with her usual authority, making pointed guesses about the donor's identity. "Probably one of the Henderson Family Foundations," she suggested. "They've always supported local churches. Could be the Pattersons. Their grandmother just passed. Maybe she left a bequest. Whoever it is, I hope they know how much their generosity means. The youth program is such a blessing." I sat quietly in my usual pew, Elijah beside me, and waited. Pastor Williams introduced me with simple dignity. "For 5 years, an anonymous donor has funded nearly every aspect of our youth program. The summer camps, the mission trips, the salary supplements that kept Pastor Michael on staff when budgets were tight. This donor has asked to address you today, not for recognition but for clarity." He gestured to me. I walked to the front of the sanctuary, feeling every eye, hearing every whisper. "Good morning. My name is Evelyn Harrison, and I'm the anonymous donor." The silence was absolute. "For 5 years, I've funded this youth program through a trust established by my grandfather. I've done it anonymously because I believe giving should be about the gift, not the giver. I've lived simply because that's how my grandfather lived, and because I wanted my son to grow up understanding that character matters more than wealth." I found Linda's face in the crowd. She'd gone pale. "But last week, my son asked me if we were poor. He asked because he'd heard church members describing us as a charity family. He asked because assumptions about our finances had filtered down to the children, making him feel less than in a community that should make everyone feel valued." I let that sink in. I'm not here for applause or recognition. I'm here to make a point. You cannot know someone's circumstances by looking at their car or their clothes, or whether they bring name-brand cookies to potlucks. The families you pity might be your biggest supporters. The people you look down on might be the ones keeping your programs alive. The aftermath was complicated. Linda approached me in the fellowship hall, her face a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been respect. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "That's exactly the problem, Linda. You had no idea, but you acted like you did. You told other mothers I was a charity case. You included my son in scholarship categories that marked him as different. You ranked families by visible contribution without considering what might be invisible. I was trying to be compassionate. You were performing compassion. Real compassion doesn't come with pity or whispered comments or ranking systems that make children feel ashamed. She was silent. I forgive you, I continued, because forgiveness is what we're supposed to practice here. But I hope you'll consider how you've made others feel. Others who maybe can't reveal hidden truths to prove you wrong. Elijah processed the revelation over the following days. So Grandpa Tom's money pays for all the church stuff? A lot of it, yes. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to be regular. To earn things, appreciate things, not feel entitled or different. Being wealthy isn't bad, but thinking you're better because of money, that's bad. But you let people think we were poor. That felt bad too. I pulled him close. You're right. I protected you from one kind of distortion and accidentally exposed you to another. I'm sorry. It's okay, Mom. He thought for a moment. Can we still be regular? I don't want to be the rich kid either. We can be whatever we want. That's the real gift. The church culture shifted after my revelation. Pastor Williams delivered a sermon series on assumptions and hidden blessings, using the situation, with my permission, as a launching point for deeper discussions about wealth, poverty, and how communities judge each other. The women's ministry under Linda became less focused on visible contribution and more on genuine connection. Rankings faded. Scholarship programs were reframed without the stigma of charity. Some families were embarrassed by how they'd treated me. Others were inspired to examine their own hidden assumptions. A few were simply confused that the quiet librarian in the Target clothes had been their biggest benefactor all along. My grandfather would have understood. He'd lived 43 years in the same small house, driving the same modest cars, never once revealing the millions quietly compounding in his investment accounts. He'd been underestimated, overlooked, probably pitted by neighbors who assumed he was struggling. He'd understood something I was still learning. That true wealth isn't about what others see. It's about what you can do without needing their recognition. I keep his letter framed in my bedroom now. Live simply. Give generously. Don't let money change who you are. The youth program continues. The donations continue. The anonymity is gone, but the principles remain. Elijah asked me recently if we're rich. We have enough to help people, I told him. Whether that makes us rich depends on how you define the word. How do you define it? Rich is having resources and choosing to share them. Poor is having resources and hoarding them. By that definition, we're very rich, but so is anyone who gives what they can, regardless of the amount. He nodded slowly. So Mrs. Morrison wasn't wrong that some families can't afford to contribute. She was just wrong about which families, and wrong about how to treat them. Compassion doesn't require conditions or rankings. It just requires care. That's a good sermon, Mom. I learned from a good church. They called me the charity case because they couldn't imagine wealth that didn't announce itself. They pitted me with their bless her hearts and their whispered prayers for my financial struggles. But every youth trip, every summer camp, every program they celebrated, it was built on gifts from the woman they looked down on. My grandfather taught me that true generosity is invisible. But sometimes the invisible needs to become visible, not for applause, but for truth. They know now. The pity has stopped. And my son knows that character matters more than perception, but perception shouldn't require shame either. Bless their hearts. They're learning.